Welcome to the Cabin Culture Podcast, where we spend a little more time diving deeper into all the fun parts of cabin culture. We like to think of this as both the material and imagined expressions of how cabin lovers, dwellers, builders, and designers wish to live a more simple and authentic life. On this episode, I'm talking to Monique and Jason from the Vermont Aframe, an original 1965 boho A-frame. This duo has been hosting on Airbnb since 2019 and are 20-time superhosts. But what I love about today's conversation is that it's not just about the cabin, the design, the Instagram. It's also about the experience, the things that we can do as hosts that elevate the overall stay, the memories that are created while people are there, and how we can facilitate that as hosts, and not necessarily the things that we do to grow online. While I totally get how important that is, it was fun to take a step back from that and really just dig into their heart as hosts. I really value their perspective on this and how they found success during their hosting journey. So thanks for joining us, and let's dive in. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's so great to have both of you. So why don't you start? A lot of folks will probably know you, but why don't you start by giving us just an overview of who you are and your cabin, why you're on the Cabin Culture Podcast.
For those of you who don't know us, we're Monique and Jason. We own and operate the Vermont Aframe. I think the story actually starts long before I even came into the picture when Jason was a kid. He used to go up to Vermont. He used to go ski at Stratton, and his family would rent the same cabin every year that was near the mountain. And Jay has a lot of fun memories growing up down by the beach or up in the mountains. And I was the opposite. I grew up going to the beach, going to like tropical vacations. I did like a couple cruises, which is like, I don't know, for me, I just can't imagine myself ever doing that now as an adult because I feel like I'm so much more drawn to the mountains. So it's something that we had discovered was like kind of a mutual love for both of us, I think pretty early on in our relationship. But I had never been to Vermont. And
okay, wait, let's pause there. Where did you each grow up? Jason, how close to Vermont were you?
I grew up in Morristown, New Jersey.
Okay.
So that's 3 hours from where our house is now.
Okay.
An hour from where we are right now.
Okay. Where are you all now?
An hour from where I sit right now. Yeah.
Okay.
And I grew up right here in this house. This is my childhood home that Jason and I now own. We renovated. So I have pretty deep roots here.
Wow. Did your parents move out? How did you end up with it? My dad just sold my childhood home, and this is like a dream that you got to save it and create like a whole new generation of memories there.
My parents are no longer with us. So my sister and I inherited it, and we lived here ourselves for a few years alone after my mom passed. My dad was, I was quite young when my dad passed. He was 45 and I was like 13. But my mom passed 9 years ago. So my sister and I were here for, I would say, like 2 or 3 years by ourselves in the house before Jason moved in. Jason moved in and was like renting from us for a little over a year, maybe, no, longer than that, like 2 years.
Yeah.
Before he decided to buy my sister's half out. And for
okay,
me,
so he didn't move in as a roommate. He moved in as your boyfriend.
Yeah.
Yep. No, I didn't.
That would be like some sort of sitcom situation.
I was like, wait, you moved in as a roommate?
Didn't fall in love with the roommate. Did meet him on Tinder. So you tell me what's worse.
No, I met my husband on Tinder, so it's fine. I mean, I had spotted him in real life, and then I sniped him. I was like a little sniper finding out where he lived, and then found him on Tinder.
How did you make that happen? Did you do the paid version of Tinder where you could change your location? Was that even around at the time?
Well, he lived less than a mile from me. We live in a very small town, and so the bartender at the local pub told me where he lived. So I just put that search radius in as less than a mile, and there weren't many. So he was the first one that showed up.
Nice.
So it's just very strategic. So I'm not judging Tinder, not at all.
This isn't the first time he's finding this out, I'm assuming.
Who? No, he found out on our first date. I'm the world's worst liar. Literally on our first date, I was like, I know a lot about you.
You're like, I did the whole background check. I can tell you your mom's maiden name, your grandfather's birthday, and the name of your first dog. So you can hack all this. afterwards, right?
Yeah. He likes to play it really cool and be like, oh, like I don't, I had seen you around, but like it turns out he had done research too. He just isn't as forthcoming as I am because I have no shame.
There is no shame in the game. And you know what? I think it makes us better like perceptors of kind of being a little more tuned in to the fine details that people might put out there. Am I wrong? Do you get what I'm
That's
saying?
interesting. Like studying people, looking for red flags, really like, I think it helps.
Yep, totally.
Okay, so I'm going to take this back. So you moved into that house. You all were living together. You, Jason, bought out her sister. How long was it? Like, had you taken her to Vermont yet? Because you had never been. When was the first time you all went to Vermont? And did you fall in love with it immediately too?
We owned the A-frame before I bought her sister out of this house.
Okay. So that happened earlier.
Yeah, so we went to Vermont together. I took her to Vermont for the first time in 2017.
The week you moved in.
Oh, so it was August of 2018.
No, it was 2017.
2017.
But it was
How long had you been dating at that point when you took her to Vermont?
A year.
A little over a year. Yeah.
Okay. Now, Jason, let me ask you, was this like a moment of truth for you? Were you like, I'm going to take her to Vermont? And like, if she can't hang, this might be a red flag or a deal breaker?
I don't know. I feel like she had already proven herself in a lot of ways. Okay. So I don't think that I was looking at that trip as like a
no, because we had already done camping together.
Yeah, we had done a lot of camping. We had done a lot of outdoor stuff together.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. The first time I took Sean to Maine, because he had never been, definitely, it was only 3 months in, but I was definitely like, if you don't like this, I don't know what our future looks like.
I was definitely that way with skiing. Like when I taught her to ski, and yeah, in the back of my mind, I was like, I really want to keep doing this as much as I can. So I'd really like it if she were able to do it too. Yeah. Thankfully, she picked it up super quick. So that was a real make or break moment, I think.
Well, I can tell by her outfit that she's quite the skier now.
It is.
Those of you listening to the podcast will need to go on YouTube to see what I'm talking about. But she looks like quite the skier.
Yeah.
As do you, Janice.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. I'm cozy and ready to ski, both.
And you have a ski trip coming up, right?
Yeah. Well, we have several. We're going to Pennsylvania this weekend for my dad's 70th, and we're sneaking in some skiing. And then we're going up to Maine in February, and we're sneaking in some skiing. And then we're going out west to Idaho and Jackson Hole just to ski.
Sweet.
Amazing. I'm so jealous. I'm currently trying to plan a ski trip for myself around some work trips that I have. So I'm looking to go out west, hopefully first week of March, first or second week of March. So,
well, if you go the second week, where are you going out west? Do you know?
So I will most likely be in Scottsdale for a conference. And then from Scottsdale, I know I can fly nonstop to Salt Lake City, which is really quick. And I can also fly nonstop to Denver. I don't think that there was a nonstop to Jackson Hole because I checked.
You're like me. I filter for nonstop. I'm like, I'm too old for layovers.
I'm like, no way. I need like all the valuable time to like settle in, unpack, and then hopefully get to the mountain as quickly as possible.
Okay, so then take me back to the moment when you started thinking about the Vermont A-frame. Did you have a plan and then you found it, or did you find it and you were like, let's make a plan?
We found a different cabin and we were like, let's make a plan. It was an A-frame, and like real estate was very different back then. This is going back to 2018. Things are super affordable. I don't even think that like there were so many homes on the market, right? That there wasn't like the sense of competition. We must have seen like 24 homes after we eventually got our search underway. But point is, there was this one home. It was an A-frame. It stood out to us. I don't even know how we came across it. I mean,
wasn't it just on Zillow?
Yeah, I think it was just on Zillow, but I don't even remember what prompted us to like start actually like looking. It was one of those like typical like, let's browse Zillow and check out homes that we wish we could buy.
Yeah, every day.
And then it was kind of like, well, wait a second. This house is actually really affordable and it's really cute. We actually might be able to buy this one. And then that just kind of like prompted the wheels to start turning. It was right around the time that Instagram really took off as like a marketing tool for a lot of brands. And I started seeing travel influencers begin to like bud up from, the ground. And there were like, uh, I started to see some cabin accounts. I remember Cabin Porn, I think the book had just come out and their account was underway. So it was like just like kind of starting, right? And I was like, and I'm looking at these and I'm looking at this house and I'm like, this house is really cute. And I'm like, it's really affordable. Like, could we do it? I don't know, like maybe. And then I think one day we were just kind of like, well, we could definitely do it if we just like rented it out on the weekends when we don't go. And then from there, it was just like, that's it. Like, hit the ground running. And I think it was less than 2 weeks later, we made the drive up and started seeing houses.
Wow. Okay. And then how long into that search did you find the one you bought? And then my second question with that was, were you looking at exclusively A-frames? Are you an A-frame cabin person or were you just a cabin person?
We were looking at all kinds of houses, not just A-frames. I think we only saw 2 or 3.
We saw a few,
A-frames.
but most of them were a mix of like chalets, log cabins,
houses. But I think that the A-frame that we ended up with, wasn't it one of the last places that we saw?
Yeah. We looked for about a month. We had taken 2 trips up there. The first trip we saw, about, I'd say probably about 20 listings over the course of 2 days. Like I said, the market was like up. It was a buyer's market at that point. There were so many houses.
You could take your time. You could sit on it. You could think.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Because then we had like the whole criteria and everything once we saw the houses and narrowed them down. So, and we did like that first A-frame a lot. A lot. I mean, it was in the final 3. Mm-hmm. Between the final 3, it was that A-frame, our A-frame, and then a log cabin. To answer part 2 of your question, I think it was about 30 to 40 days from when we started looking to when we put an offer in on the A-frame. Because I want to say we put an offer in like the end of July.
Yeah.
Or the beginning of July because we closed on the 28th.
August. Yeah.
So not too long of a process, but I mean, by today's standards, that's like, ages.
Luxurious.
Yeah. But I think our history with A-frames goes back to your dad.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask if Jason's cabin that he went to was an A-frame.
So no, the cabin that we went to was not an A-frame. It was kind of just more of like a chalet style house towards the base of Stratton. But when my dad was in his like mid 20s, he and his friend bought this big piece of desert in Arizona and went there and built an A-frame in the middle of the desert. So yeah, that we kind of have some, and like he would always talk about it as a child when I was a child. So like I always in my mind had like A-frames as these kind of like interesting and like kind of like mystical things and structures. So they've always kind of like attracted me, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. What I kind of love about yours, the one that you all have, is that it was built in 1965, which feels like the kind of first wave of A-frames, like the most, I don't want to say authentic, but like when they originated. And now we're experiencing the second wave. It feels like there was a whole lull in between where we still liked them, but they weren't being built.
Yeah.
And now they're being built like rapidly. How does that feel? Do you have any sort of feelings about that as the owner of like a more older A-frame and seeing the growth of it? Does that excite you, or is it like, how does that feel?
I think it's exciting. Mm-hmm. It's kind of cool to think that we have, like you said, like, do we have the original A-frame? No. But I know from reading some architecture books, especially there's that book by, I think the guy's name is Chad Randall that we have in the house called A-frame, which was printed, decades ago, kind of talks about the history of A-frames and how a lot of them originated from kind of that like Sears catalog mentality where people had lots of disposable income that they were able to start buying not just a first home, but a second home. And they wanted something that was easy to construct and went up quickly and was affordable. And I think an A-frame kind of checked all three of those boxes. And our house is definitely one of those. Because when you drive on our street, it's a small street. There are a couple houses on us. We have some neighbors. I think like 50% of them are A-frames, and they're all like the same iteration of our house.
Yeah. Our next door, the neighbor directly next to us up the street is identical. It's an identical house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She still has the original like scalloped trim on the front of hers, which I think is so freaking cute. It looks like a little gingerbread house, and it's actually in a couple.
Yeah, like in the Alps or something.
I can show you all sorts of pictures of these because there's a photographer that's local to New England that did some photos for Stetson, and Stetson used that house as a background for their photos.
Oh my God, please send me those photos.
Yeah, I will.
Okay, this raises another question. Does she rent hers too, or does she live in it full time?
She doesn't live in it full time. She's an older woman. Her family's been in that neighborhood for a long time. Her brother owns the house next door. I don't think he rents either. But they do visit frequently because they're from about an hour and a half away from southern Vermont. So they go up there a lot. But they are the sweetest family. We love having them as neighbors.
Yeah. God, what a blessing. Right. Having good neighbors when you have an Airbnb is like so important.
I know.
But this like brings me to the question of like with A-frames becoming so trendy now, you're seeing a lot of them and you're seeing a lot of them look very similarly. So then you're faced with this marketing challenge of like, how do I differentiate mine? How do I tell the story of my A-frame? I grapple with this a lot because obviously I didn't design mine and the person who designed it sells plans for it. So there's going to be many of them that look very similar. How do you tell your story? How do you think about that? I'm guessing, Monique, you do all the marketing, but clarify if I'm wrong, Jason, if you also think and strategize around this. But
how'd you know?
Just guessing. You are the one I've talked to, so that's usually how I know whoever's messaging me. But how do you think about that?
To be fair, all design decisions in terms of like how we've furnished and decorated the house and like when we did our bathroom renovations, I run everything by Jay. This is a team effort. I want him to feel comfortable when we go to the house, like I feel comfortable. Similar to the philosophy that we took when he moved into this house, I didn't want it to feel like, my childhood house. I wanted it to feel like ours. So he is very involved in like the kind of like final say when it comes to like, do we really think this is a good idea? But I usually come up with a vision, right?
I'm glad Sean doesn't listen to my podcast because I don't want him getting, empowered to start vetoing my decisions or anything. As of right now, that does not.
I veto very few decisions, to be fair.
You trust her. That's what's important.
You're sweet. You're sweet. I like this question because there are times, especially with the increase in people building not just like A-frames and cabins, but A-frames and cabins specifically that are going to be meant for short-term rentals, because I grapple a lot with insecurities around the fact that like we didn't build our house ourselves, and that it is an older home, and with an older home comes quirks. Our kitchen is pretty much the original kitchen to the house. And when we bought the house, we even had the original bathroom. So is it luxury? It's not. The kitchen's definitely like a little rustic, fully functional, but it's tiny and it has like, the original cabinets and everything. And I definitely struggle at times because I see these beautiful cabins, these beautiful A-frames being built around us, and how quickly they're able to kind of establish a foothold in the industry, and how people do have there is a demand for these more luxury homes. And I feel like, is our home not up to par anymore? And then I kind of remember that even though we didn't build our house comes with a long history, and actually a very cool history if you start thinking about what happened on our street before we bought our house, which I can talk about later. And that is ultimately, I think, what influenced the design aesthetic that we kind of lent into when it came to our house, because A-frames are inherently a product of like the mid-century style, right? So,
Yeah.
and when we bought our house, like the coffee table that's in our living room, that's the coffee table that came with the house, which is like
The A-frame or the house you're
the
in?
A-frame.
Okay. I love that.
So we kept that because it just really was like assigned to me that I should stick with that aesthetic. And I actually love that aesthetic. If you don't see what's behind us, like we have tons of mid-century style furniture here
Yeah.
too. But I feel like always,
I'm looking at pictures of your cabin as you're talking, just so I can like visualize what you're talking about. I
yeah,
have your
yeah.
Instagram feed on one side of the screen and you on the other.
So I always, even though it's more competitive, I try to come back to that now because it's a good reminder
Yes.
of where we started and who we are as hosts and as a brand. And, just because I might be having this like somewhat like this version of imposter syndrome when it comes to comparing myself to other people, like we don't need to be like everyone else. We can be different. We can have an older cabin that has lots of great, smaller amenities and maybe nothing luxury, but if you read our reviews, like a lot of times people talk about the little touches, all the extra touches. Like
Mhm.
you can still have something that's special that people want to visit without being brand new, luxury, modern aesthetic.
Yes. Thank you for saying that because I do feel like my first cabin was similar to yours. I still own it. It's in Boone. And I fucking loved that cabin when I bought it. It was like my pride and joy, everything about it. I decorated it. I want you to picture like antler lights and bear rugs. And like I like leaned in because I didn't know any better. And I was like, this is what cabins are like. And I loved every second of it. And then when in like 2019, when Instagram started blowing up with cabins, all of a sudden I started to feel like, oh, it's not good enough.
Yeah.
Like I need to redo the design. I need to like get rid of the green tile in the bathroom because it's gross. And like I really hate what it did. And then after building Cozy Rock, I got to do a lot of the things I wanted to, and that almost highlighted it more. Like, and I kind of miss the relationship I used to have with it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Before all the outside voices come in and tell you what it should look like.
Yeah. I mean, I listened to one of your podcasts from a while ago, and I'm going to totally fuck up how you referred to it as, but you talked about like the three different levels, right? Cozy Rock is, I think you referred to it as the unicorn.
Yep.
And
The
then,
workhorse and the
yes,
donkey. Yeah.
yes. But there's nothing wrong with not having a unicorn.
That's
You
right.
can still create something special. You can still create something that's Instagram worthy. And you can still be
Mhm.
fully booked up with something that wasn't built yesterday.
Yeah. And even more important than Instagram worthy, you can build something that's experience worthy. Like for 4 years, people had great experiences there. And yet I was questioning all of that because of the green tile in the bathroom or the, copper faucets or whatever it was, And I'm like, wait, is this how I really feel? Like if I rent a cabin, do I really care about those things? Or is this what the internet is telling me I should care about?
Yeah, 100%. And it's especially hard because we have great relationships with a lot of the people that have entered this space with those newer cabins. And I love them.
Yeah.
But I always have to remind myself, remember who we are, remember what our values are, remember what made us successful in the first place. And like, don't stray from that. Don't reinvent the wheel, but build on it. How can we make it
Yeah.
better while still staying true to ourselves?
Yeah. And I do think if more people could, because when building Cozy Rock, I worked with an interior designer, but I was very much like, this needs to be my cabin. I'm
Mhm.
not trying to replicate what I see on a mood board on the
Yeah.
internet. We didn't buy like any white furniture. There's not a whole lot of like modernish stuff. It's like stuff that I like. But it's still hard to like balance those two things because you also want it to do well on, to find people
Yeah.
or whatever. But I do think, and that's why I like thinking about the three business models, that it doesn't have to be the unicorn, or even better, you can create a unicorn out of a 1965 A-frame,
Yeah.
And part of that is about design and whatever, but part of it is about the experience you're creating for people
Mhm.
and how they feel when they're there, not what they think when they're looking at it on Instagram.
Yeah. Yeah. We definitely lean into the experience. And I think we've shifted a lot from in the beginning, a lot of our photos were just like of the space because that's what we needed for, our listing online in order to make it stand out. But now I've
Mhm.
realized that people resonate a lot with the lifestyle kind of photos to
Mhm.
actually show like how you can enjoy the space. Like, okay, here's my couch with the cool mid-century table in front of it, but like, are you hanging out on the couch with your dog? Are you reading a book? Are you looking at the fire? Are you playing chess or a board game?
Right.
So more like, show me people actually enjoying the space, because then the people looking at you on Instagram or the people finding you on Airbnb or finding your website can picture themselves in the space.
Yes. Yes. And like we have a card game. Have you ever heard of the Skin Deep?
Yes, sort of. I think I know what you're
Yeah.
talking about.
It's like super simple. It's just a card deck with questions, but it was created by filmmakers, which I can relate to because I'm a filmmaker. And filmmakers notoriously are good question askers because we're trying to uncover a story and we have to be. So they're using that skill to make these questions to create more intentional conversations. And so we do it all the time. We've done it our whole relationship. It's how I proposed to Sean. It's like a big part of our relationship. But I also think that it's a tool for connection. And it's like, okay, well, that's nowhere on our Instagram feed. I'm sure if I did a post about it, it probably wouldn't get very many views. But like in my mind, I'm like, that's one of the most important things I've put into the cabin, right? Because if you come there for an anniversary and find this deck and end up having a 3-hour conversation with wine in front of the fire and leave with like a deeper understanding of each other, like that's way more valuable than a viral reel that shows off the furniture that you sourced from West Elm or wherever. I'm calling myself out. That's where I bought some of my furniture.
That's where our couch and our media console is from. And
Yes, me too. Me too.
So, yeah.
So nothing wrong with West Elm, but like I can tag them in that. But like this is going to actually has the potential to change an experience. How do we get that to go viral? Right? You're not going to. So it's okay.
If I had to guess, in your like guest guidebook, I know you always read your what people write in it before you leave.
Yeah.
I guarantee a lot of people are mentioning the time and what they did with those games in that guest guidebook.
Yeah, they're not talking about the couch. And I mean, it's probably not the world's best couch, but that's not what they're talking about. There was one in particular, and I'm going to follow this up with, I'd love to know the guest book or the experience from a guest that has stood out the most to you. But it was parents who had fostered kids over and over, one after another for 17 years. And they were there celebrating their wedding anniversary. And it was like one of the first times where it was just the two of them. And they talked about reading books out loud to each other in front of the fire for hours. And I was just like, I could picture them having that experience and what that must feel like after kids in and out of your house for so long, right? And I was like, damn, like that's why we're doing this. Like that, I don't know, that just really stood out. Do you have a guest book that people write in?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, what's one of them that stood out the most to you about the experiences they've had?
Well, we've had a couple people get engaged
at the house. Yeah,
at the house.
Yeah, we've had a handful of
That's
people.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
Including ourselves.
Yep. Yep. Sure
I love
did.
that.
Were
you the first ones to get engaged there?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No. We got engaged in 2020, so we already had the house for almost 2 years, and I'm pretty sure I might have pictures. If you go way back on the Instagram, you might find pictures of the first couple that got engaged there. I'm drawing a blank.
I'm gonna dig. When I'm editing, I'll dig those up.
But yeah, so engaged, we've had a lot of people do. There was a family that came.
It was a big
big family.
And we were almost at the point where we were like, I don't know if we want to accommodate this. It's so many people. It was like 7 or 8 people.
I think it was 7 people, which is technically one over what we would normally accommodate. And technically our house is really most comfortable if you're dealing with 4 adults because we only have 2 bedrooms. We do have the pull-out couch, and really the pull-out couch is really like, people use it if they have young kids. Like, so normally if someone's coming and it's 6 people, it's normally like parents and then young kids, because then it doesn't feel as crowded. But for whatever reason, the girl seemed really nice. I don't even remember if she had positive Airbnb reviews before, but she seemed really nice. And she mentioned something about it being the first time that their family was all getting back together after the pandemic. So this might have been like, it might have been like 21, 22.
Yeah. It was in the winter.
It was in the winter, yeah. So we said yes. And I remember while they were there, they were posting pictures, and the pictures were adorable. The group of them were in the front of the house. We leave a tripod so people can take a selfie in front of the house, because that's like
an idea.
Yeah. We've gone through like 4 or 5 tripods by now.
They
So if you have as a photographer and videographer, if you have a recommendation for one that's good for a cell phone, that's universal, like please
People always ask that, but we spend like $300 on our tripods, and I'm like, nobody wants a $300 tripod. More than that, actually. But so the cheap ones are probably the best bet, and just know you have to go through them occasionally.
Yeah, so like once a year we're replacing the tripods, but they work really well. People usually use them to take a picture right in front of the house because like that's the postcard moment. Like there are podcasts out there and like Instagram influencers out there that talk about like the Instagram moment within your house. Like our Instagram moment is taking a picture in front of the house because it's an A-frame.
Yeah.
Everyone freaking loves the A-frame. So seeing the picture of the big family in front of the house was so sweet, and they were all like hugging each other and all of that. But then what made it extra special was a couple weeks later when we went up to the house after they had stayed, I was reading the messages that they had left. And all of them had written something special. Like it almost made me cry. Even the kids wrote notes and like drew pictures in the guest book about how wonderful of a time they had and how much their, every generation that was with them enjoyed it, from like the grandmother all the way to the kids. So that was really one that stood out to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was really sweet.
I'm so glad you shared that story, because I feel like as hosts, we can get really, it's important to guard our boundaries, but we can get really like, oh, one extra person? No, like, how dare you? Or like, no, you moved the gas logs around on my fire, or whatever. Like, Sean is the worst. I'm not saying we're an exception. But that's just a good reminder that sometimes people are asking things not because they want to be difficult or they're trying to like push your boundaries, but because they just want to create a good experience for their family and they love your place and they want to do it there.
We are pretty lax most of the time because like I tend to have a little too much trust in people. And you know what? For the most part,
I
like
don't think that's inherently a bad
I don't
thing.
think it's inherently a bad thing either. And I mean, knock on wood, we've had, mostly good experiences. We haven't really had any nightmare guests that have like done anything egregious inside the house. We've had the messy guest. We've had the guests that are just awful communicators or communicate too much.
Need a lot of hand holding.
Yeah.
We call them helpless hand raisers as a teacher in the teacher world. The kids who like you say, okay, now get to work. And they're like, I need help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're helpless hand raising guests.
Yeah.
And we've had them. But like when we get guests that are new to Airbnb or someone who's like, hey, I'm coming with like 2 or 3 dogs, those are not the kind of things that like we spend our time being nitpicky about, because I'm just like, honestly, because we work full time and I'm just like, I know that we can handle this no matter what happens. So let's pick and choose our battles.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I feel the same way. I also think you've been hosting longer than some of the hosts that I've talked to. And so I do think with time, the more good experiences that outweigh the bad, and like how much the bad ones are not quite as bad as you think they're going to be, over time, you're just like, I trust you. And you see all the good experiences that come from it when you're like, this isn't a big deal. Bring the extra person. And then you hear that. It's like, okay, all right, worth it. I'll do that again.
Yeah. I mean, again, there are definitely times where people have come to us and we've had to say no. During the pandemic, we had a handful of people reach out to us about hosting like elopements or weddings at our house. And those people we had to be honest with, because we were like, honestly, I know that like maybe from our pictures, doing a wedding on our front deck would make for a beautiful image. But what you don't see is that there really isn't a front yard. It's like, that's where you park your car and you can hear the road from where our house is. Especially if you're coming in the winter and there's no like insulation from the trees, then the road noise can be kind of loud during rush hour. And we don't try to hide any of these things. We're totally transparent about them on our listing, both in text and in photos. And I hate having to say no. So anytime we say no for a reason like that, I'm like, but you should check out this person's house and this person's house and this person's house and reach out to them, and tell them that I sent you because I talk to them all the time and, I can vouch for them. I know that they're a good host.
Yeah. That's the value of community. I feel like there was a time where Airbnb hosts weren't, especially in the same location, weren't interacting that much because they viewed each other as competition. I could just be speaking from my own experience that I felt very isolated in those early years. And I feel like everyone kept to themselves. And then once we started talking, even within the same communities, it was like, oh, well, you have a hot tub cleaner you like? Great. Oh, you can't accommodate this repeat guest that weekend? Does anyone else have a good place? Like there's so much value add there.
There's so much value in that. And there's also so much potential to grow the network between each other because of that. So you get repeat guests. How many of your guests do you think are repeat guests? Like if you had to put a percentage on it.
A percentage, I would say maybe 10 to 15.
Okay. So that's actually a really good amount.
It feels like not that much.
I think that's actually a really good amount, especially for a destination that is a further drive to destination. Do most of your guests come from Boston? No, you have a wider. They do come from Boston?
We get a fair amount from, I would say the Boston, Maine region is maybe 25 to 30%. And then the rest is a little bit further or a lot further. Occasionally we'll get people coming, like flying in from places, but.
Okay. So we're pretty much the same. Our primary feeder market is like New York-ish and occasionally Boston. I would say more New York,
New Jersey,
Connecticut, like the suburbs. I would say at least like 50%. And then outside of that, a little bit of Boston. And then, yes, the occasional person that's flying in and kind of doing like a New England. We get this a lot in the fall when people are doing New England road trips that they're flying.
Going up.
Yeah, exactly. I would say our repeat guest percentage is probably about 5%. Yeah. I think the reason is probably because we're in such a, not just our market in Southern Vermont in particular, but just the Northeast in general has so many amazing places that you can visit that even when you really, really, really love one house, there's so many other little towns out there and so many other rentals that have been beautifully decorated and have wonderful hosts and have so much to do nearby that people probably struggle like, hey, okay, I'm choosing where I'm going to take a trip for like this spring or this fall. Maybe you only get the opportunity to travel somewhere for a weekend, 2 or 3 times a year. So I understand that perspective of like why it might not make sense for us to have, or why we might not be seeing as many repeats.
Yeah. That's interesting to think about because I do think that the majority, I'm thinking of a handful of the same repeat guests who've been 3 or 4 times, and they're all weekday bookers. So I feel like they're not considering it as like a big trip. It's like, oh, I go up to Freeport for whatever and I can work there, but I can also, our repeat guests, a lot of our one-time guests are celebrating something or it is a vacation.
Yeah.
That's interesting to think about.
I think our biggest repeat guest is definitely, she stays for a couple weeks usually, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have a horse show that's nearby in Manchester. And we typically, she stayed with us for 3 years now. She usually books 1 to 2 weeks in July, and she's just lovely. And she has, I think, two young girls or 2 young kids that come with her, and she's just absolutely lovely to have. And it's nice knowing that like she feels comfortable enough in our house, especially knowing that she stayed with us for 2 weeks before. Because I remember the first time she booked with us, I was like, is she going to feel like she's in a prison in our house for 2 weeks? Because
she's going to get sick of it.
Because I mean, A-frames are inherently not the most.
They're very cozy.
Yeah, because the ceiling is low. Like if you have a loft, right?
Well, it's the angles of the
like
wall.
One A-frame.
The angles of the walls make it so that it can at times feel kind of cramped. Like in the kitchen, right? The kitchen is here, and there's an angle wall like this, so it's like you're kind of at times having to duck. You're walking into the bedroom around the bed, you kind of have to, so it can feel a little cramped at times in the rooms because of the angles.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
But when she enjoyed it, I was like pleasantly surprised, and I was like, "Oh my God, come back anytime, please!" And then,
what a treat! A 2-week guest.
Yeah,
nice. Yeah.
And then, sure enough, she booked the year after and the year after that.
I love that. So, and they're not the ones who are going to be messaging you at 12 a.m. asking where the silverware is. Yes, I've literally had that happen. But like they know where everything is. It feels like it's their cabin that they're going to visit, which is amazing.
Yeah. I forget how we got off on that tangent or why I even asked about the repeat guests, but I'm sure I'm sure there was somewhere that I was going.
That's okay. That was all helpful. Because this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where there's so much like feels like there's more mass production of A-frames. How do you, when you were designing yours and you two were doing that together, were there any specific design choices aside from the coffee table, which I loved, that you chose that are particularly meaningful to you, that like represent your story, your cabin, that makes it different?
I think there were little things that we did, like the record player.
Yeah.
Totally symbolic, like, of our relationship. We've had a record player in there since day one. We've upgraded it since we first started, but we always had a record player there. And the selection of our records is actually very meaningful to us. There might be one or two in there that just got kind of like thrown in that were extras that were lying around. But for the most part, between us and we have a very good friend, Sean, who's a musician. Shameless plug. Everyone should check out Sean Marshall on Spotify. He's awesome.
Is that SEAN or SHAU?
Yeah, SEAN.
Okay, that's how my Sean spells it. He calls it the correct way to spell Sean.
Sean and Jason used to be in a band together, and Sean married us, so he is one of our like very good friends now.
I love this.
He now lives in Salt Lake City with his wife and his 4 or 5 month old baby. Yeah, but Sean's really very much still involved in the music industry, still plays in a band, etc. Knows everything music wise. And anytime that I'm like, hey, the record collection like needs a refresh, like this is the mood. Like, what are you listening to? Tell us what we should check out. And he usually comes up with like a list of like 3 or 4 records. And he's like, you should listen to these and see if you want these for the A-frame. And sure enough, every time I'm like $150 later, dropped on records, add to the collection.
Worth it.
Totally worth it.
Everyone needs a Sean.
Yeah, everyone needs a Sean. Sean is a great person, hands down, all around. By the time that this comes out, I assume that this is usually delayed a couple days, if not a few weeks.
Couple weeks, yeah.
So by the time that this is out, we will have a Vermont A-frame playlist launched on Spotify that we had.
I love this.
Yeah, we had Sean help us curate playlist. We're going to be refreshing it. Probably one for each season.
Yeah.
So right now we put out our winter playlist. That way, you know, even if you don't want to fuss with the record player, you can just get to the A-frame, plug it in, turn on some tunes. And this is kind of like a playlist that will encompass any time of day. So whether you're kind of like waking up and making a fire and just having a cup of coffee, or coming back from a day of skiing and you just like need to veg out on the couch for a little bit, or you're having a cocktail by the fire, any time of day. That was like the guidelines that we gave him. So that'll be out and it'll probably be linked on our Instagram somewhere.
I'm so excited about this because I've been working on one for Cozy Rock and I've not made much progress. So now I don't have to make one. I'll just put in my guest book thanks to our friends at Vermont A-frame.
There you go.
A little QR code.
Exactly.
Thank you for saving me time.
What other things are at the house that kind of encompass our relationship? Chess.
Yeah, the chessboard. Early on in our relationship, I lived in Asbury Park, and there was a great brewery there. And I don't know, we over like the winter, like the first or second winter that we were dating, I don't know, it felt like we were there all the time.
Yeah,
we went to the brewery all the time, and they happened to have a chessboard. And I don't think you even knew how to play chess at the time.
I certainly did not.
So I taught her how to play chess, and we would play each other. We would basically just go to the brewery and play chess. So it's definitely something that we've kept doing. We do it a little bit less now, but it was a big part of our relationship at the beginning for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
A good thing to have at a cabin too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome thing to have at a cabin. That's probably the game that we still go to the most when we're up there.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Okay, tell me a little bit about your cabin fashion.
Like what we're wearing at the cabin?
Not necessarily right now, though you could talk, but like when you go to the cabin, what does your cabin fashion look like?
Like like what we wear at.
When you're at the cabin, just the two of you.
So, I mean, yeah, typically in the winter, I mean, we're going skiing. So it's like in the morning, it's base layers, mid layers.
Yeah.
And
all the layers.
Yeah. And then
when I go skiing.
Yeah. And then when we come back, it's also probably long johns and sweatshirts.
Yeah. There's a lot of oversized sweaters in my rotation. That when I pull off the mid layer, I just pop on whatever cleanest oversized sweater is nearest to me.
Yes.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like it's rare that like when we're up there in the winter and going skiing, like the only time I'll put on like real clothing is if like we're going out to dinner somewhere.
Yep.
The rest of the time I'm wearing long johns and
I feel like I'm
hoodie.
always the optimistic one, and I'm always like, well, let me like, and this is chronic problem of mine because I always overpack. I am the worst traveler, the worst. I'm always like optimistic, like let me pack a nice outfit just in case, like we
Do
go
a
to
fancy
Seesaws or
Yep.
we go to Crooked Ram. I'm like, well, let me pack my dress. And then when I have to, if I pack, my cozy dress, because I have like one specific dress that I'm always like, this is a good one. But then I have to pack the boots that go with it.
Yep.
Now we're already at
And
like
that's what takes up the space right there.
exactly.
It's the shoes.
Exactly. Thank you. I cannot travel with less than 3 pairs of shoes. Most of the time, I think it usually ends up being about 5.
Because it's just different, especially if you're going skiing, because you need like the boots to go into the lodge, but then you need the ski boots, but then you need like the comfy shoes that you wear when you get back, then the pair if you're going out to eat, then your
Mhm,
slippers. Like,
mhm. Yes, all of
what's
the
the girl
above.
to do?
All of the above. All of the above. So yeah, lots of comfy clothes at the cabin. Jason stereotypically is usually wearing a flannel at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. I use a lot of flannel as like mid layers usually when we go skiing.
Yeah.
So that
Would
usually
you say you lean towards LL Bean?
I do have an
There's a
LL
right
Bean.
and wrong answer
Hurt
here.
her feelings.
What? Yeah, yes. LL Bean.
Yeah,
I do have
that's
a
what I thought.
I do have a great LL Bean pullover
He loves his fleece pullover,
that
like
I
the
wear all
mall
Yes.
the time.
one.
I wear that all the time.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. My only goal in life is to get sponsored by LL Bean, so I just had to ask.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're
Okay,
from Freeport, so
that's right. We had like an LL Bean wedding, basically, but still nothing. One day,
LLB, this
one
is a
day.
missed opportunity for you. Do you hear
I'm
us?
trying so hard, so hard.
Get into
Okay.
cabin culture.
Yeah. So, okay, last question, but it's two parts because you're an A-frame owner. What, in your opinion, makes a cabin a cabin? Jason, you have deep roots with this, so I'll be curious to hear your answer. And then, secondly, are all A-frames cabins? Like, just by default, is an A-frame a cabin?
It's a great question because I feel like you say what makes a cabin, and a lot of people are like a cabin, log cabin. There has to be logs. There has to be wood. I don't think that I necessarily think of it that way. I think what makes a cabin is like I don't know. I feel like it has to feel like an escape of some sort. So like
Mm.
even no matter like where it's positioned geographically or how remote or not remote it is, it has to feel like you are getting away, like you are escaping, or you know what I'm saying.
Mm.
So it doesn't. I don't think it has to be like any type of particular like construction material, but it has to definitely when you're going there, you have to feel like okay, I'm getting away.
Yeah.
For me, that I think is what makes a cabin a cabin.
If our house,
I like that it's a state of mind for you
Yeah.
more than it is like a descriptor of the physical space. It's just like how you feel.
Yeah.
if our house, our same,
Okay, what about you?
if our house, our same exact house was put on a street on the beach,
Yeah.
would you still consider it a cabin?
I don't know. I want to say yes. I don't know.
Ponder that one.
Okay.
Yeah, God, for me, man, that's hard. I do feel like my view on this has changed a little bit because there are so many modern cabins that have come out. Those,
Guilty. Yeah,
yeah,
I
but
hear
no,
that.
no. But I was just gonna my part, my second part of that is gonna say that when it's a modern cabin, the materials used do have an influence over whether it feels like a cabin or not.
Yeah.
Right. So if I were to look at, a one of those like I'm sure you know the company Den Outdoors is one of the ones that does like
Mhm.
A-frames. if I were to make a den outdoors and not use any wood either on the exterior or the interior, and it was all like just regular sheetrock with paint, would that feel like a cabin? Probably not.
And those are all A-frames. So that goes to the second question of, is an A-frame inherently a cabin? It's more about materials, you're saying.
I think it is more about materials.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I would put those two answers together, and I wonder if the materials used don't help with the state of mind. If it's
100%.
drywall, which is what you see at home,
Yeah.
then it just feels like a different home. But if there's wood everywhere and that puts you into that state of mind of it being an escape.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that, because it's like, okay, you could have a suburban typical neighborhood home and plop it down on 50 acres in the most remote part of the country. It's not going to feel like a cozy cabin, right?
100%.
Right.
But yeah, so if you have like a kind of like you use the right materials, you use those kind of cabin designs, no matter where it is going to kind of take you away, transport you a little bit.
Especially if you've got your fire element.
Yeah.
So fire pit, fireplace, wood stove.
That's a big deal. That was one of the top 5 criteria, I think, when we were looking for a house. It has to have a fireplace. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So do you have a fireplace or a wood stove at the cabin?
A wood stove.
Wood stove. It's inserted into the old fireplace. Yeah. So it is a standing wood stove that just kind of sits in where the fireplace was. So it's not one of those flush.
So much better for guests.
Yeah.
I can't imagine an open fireplace with guests. That would cause me so much anxiety.
Same. Yeah. I mean, I'm even nervous with the wood stove, but it's I think it's definitely a lot safer. It's just so much more contained.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Guys, this was so great. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for joining us. And if you liked what you heard, feel free to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or share some of your favorite parts over on Apple Podcast. If you have feedback or suggestions for the future, you can also find me on Instagram at Cozy Rock Cabin. Looking forward to next week.